anytime you use the word every in your day or your business, right? Every time a new client signs up, every time I do a podcast recording, every time I send an invoice, the word every should be a trigger and a flag for you that this is a repetitive activity. And any repetitive activity in your life probably has an element, if not its entirety, that can be automated completely and taken off your plate. So start thinking about that in terms of automation. If this, then that. What are those triggers and actions that I can take advantage of so that I don't have to do this anymore? And the thing about automation to think about is automation is, yes, it's cheaper. Yes, it works 24/7. It never quits. It never gets sick. All this stuff. That's all great. But for me, the number one benefit of automation is a reduction of errors.
From humble beginnings, Insurance Claim HQ has grown to one of the largest property casualty firms in the country. We didn't do it alone, and you shouldn't either. Every week, we're talking to claims professionals and top experts from all over, all to help you grow your business and make you stronger. Let's level up together. I'm Galen Hare. Welcome to the Level Up Claims Podcast. Most leaders I know are working harder than ever. Long hours, endless emails, constant fires to put out. And still, they feel like they're falling behind. But what if the answer isn't doing more, but actually doing less? Today, I'm joined by Ari Meisel, entrepreneur, coach, and productivity expert. He's worked with Tony Robbins, NASA, and some of the biggest organizations in the world. He's built a framework that shows leaders how to free up time, avoid burnout, and create more impact by optimizing, automating, and outsourcing. Stick around. This one just might give you your life back. Ari, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So really, really awesome story. I've enjoyed reading about you, listening to other podcasts, watching videos. I was really pumped to get into this. But for our viewers and listeners that are not as familiar with you, let's talk about how you became the Ari that's sitting before us today, because you had kind of an interesting story and I think a lot of people can relate.
So I'll give you the really short version. Basically, after college, I got involved in real estate development or construction. And I did a big rehab project where I took some old buildings and turned them into lofts in a place called Binghamton in upstate New York, and worked in the trades for about 3 years, doing pretty much every construction trade there is. Worked my butt off, was very stressed, was not taking particularly good care of my health. And when I was 23, I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And Crohn's is a chronic inflammatory condition. And essentially, it took me from working 18 hours a day down to an hour a day if I was lucky. Through a long process of biohacking, self-experimentation, I was able to overcome the illness. And a big part of that journey was creating a new system of productivity to help me deal with that question of what would you do if you could only work an hour a day? And I created a new system of productivity called Less Doing, with the idea of optimizing, automating, and outsourcing everything in people's lives and businesses in order to be more effective. That turned into several books. I started speaking on stages all around the world and started coaching. And as I was working with larger and larger, more high-profile businesses, I developed a more business-focused methodology I call the Replaceable Founder, which teaches people how to become more replaceable in their businesses and everybody else in the business as well. Not replaced, but replaceable, like creating systems and processes, automation and delegation. And I've basically focused the last decade of my life on coaching high-performing entrepreneurs and founders and executives to do just that in just about every industry there is. And then I ended up here on this podcast.
So let's kind of go back to right before you create Less Doing, More Living. All right. Crohn's is a brutal disease for any of you listening at home that either know someone or going through it yourself. It just absolutely takes you out. So walk me through your mindset when suddenly you cannot act at what I would call like 100% capacity Ari, right? But you still need to make a living and survive. Like what's going on in your mind at that point?
Yeah, so it came at a very weird time in my life. So I was diagnosed when I was 23. In retrospect, I'd been having symptoms since I was 14, but it just infrequent enough that we never really looked into it too much. And I was diagnosed the same month that I met the woman who is my wife now, and we started dating. And I had just finished the project in upstate New York and had racked up $3 million of personal debt at that point when I was 23 and had not sold a single unit yet, which was a very interesting place to be. So I was broken in a lot of different ways, but I was also starting this new relationship, and I still had to get these things sold. I had all the stuff that I needed to get done. And so it was a dark time for me. Let's put it that way, lightly. I would say it was a pretty dark time, and it was very hard for me to sort of figure out what was going to happen, what was going to be next. And I was on a lot of medicine for at least 2 years before I really started this process of pulling myself out of that. And I started very small. I actually started with the Wii Fit, if you remember that. That was my first attempt at getting back to being physically able, and sort of quickly progressed past that. But this extreme restriction on my time, I still think was one of the most valuable experiences in my life. And I believe that restrictions, in many cases, artificially restrictive limits that we put on ourselves actually make us more innovative. And so what was really interesting for me at the time was all these productivity systems that are out there that are really, really powerful and good for lots of people, like getting things done. Or now, we have the bullet journal. We have all sorts of methods for being more productive. They all are really focused on like how you can get the most done in like whatever time you have and all this stuff. At the time, at least, there was nothing that focused the opposite, which is like, you have an hour. How do you need everything done? Because the point is, at that point, the question really isn't, what are you going to do? It's really, what aren't you going to do? Because you can't do everything yourself in an hour. So that's where the idea of optimized automated outsource came from. Right? If you can't do it, but it still has to get done, then who or what is going to do it for you? And so that was sort of the thesis that kicked off a blog post that I wrote about different productivity tricks and tips that I was working on. And then I taught a class on a whim. There was a new website at the time called Skillshare that basically connected individuals to teach anything to anyone. And so I taught a productivity tools class, I think it was called. It was like $5. I had 8 people. And it was great. It went really well. And I started doing that more and more, and they started developing the content and testing it out with the audience, a lot like a comedian would do, right? Like, you testing out jokes and sort of see what happens. And within a few months, I was doing that class twice a month for 40 people, paying $50 each, and getting really great feedback. And eventually took a video recording of one of those classes, and that became the book, the first book, Less Doing More Living. And then what happened was somebody came up to me after one of the classes, and they're like, "Hey, that was so great. Do you offer private coaching?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." And I'd never done it before. I was like, "Yes, I do. And it's this much money." And I don't know where I came up with that, but that was how I started coaching, when I sort of jumped into that. And it just started building and building itself. And so, long way of sort of answering the question, I've come to believe in my life, at least, and it's something I teach to my clients as well, as this idea of Kaizen, the Japanese philosophy of continual improvement for the good, right? So it's small incremental changes every day in every way you can to be better and better. And no matter how sick somebody is or how restricted they might be, there's always something small that we can start with.
Yeah. And it sounds like the answer is organic, but that's something I was really curious about that I didn't really get to the bottom of, is Less Doing More Living, your first book. It sounds like it kind of evolved organically out of necessity, or was there like an aha moment where you were like, look, I can do what I need to do. I just have to figure out how to prioritize and what to cut out?
It was completely organic. It was really, but it was both, actually. It was out of necessity, but it was organic because it was just like, well, I got to, so the very first fundamental of the book, the original book, was the 80-20 rule, which is certainly not mine, right? But it's sort of in line with that issue. Like, I only have a certain amount of time. What can I do that has the most impact in that small amount of time? And so that started me on the idea of actually trying to like look at what I'm doing. And I know that sounds really silly, but so many of us do so many things every day. A lot of us, that step of like actually taking a look and being like, what did I actually do today? Or what am I actually spending my time on? Evades a lot of people. There's so many times you ask me like, how are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm so busy. And anytime I hear somebody say that, I love to push back and be like, well, what are you so busy with? And I can't even tell you, like 8 times out of 10, probably the person is like, I'm so busy. They can't even answer you because it's so easy to live in that state of overwhelm without ever trying to pick your head up out of the water and see if you're actually heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, it doesn't sound silly, and secondly, it makes a lot of sense. And how many people, whether it's because of family commitments, or whether it's because of disease, or whether it's just because of being overcommitted at work, or some combination thereof, how many people find themselves over and over saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't get to that. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week." I think I'd be shocked if there's a single listener that can't identify with that symptom, right?
One of the things that I have been called at times is an overwhelmologist, right? And the interesting thing, or the interesting, sad, whatever it is, thing about overwhelm is that what I see far too often is we get this extreme state of overwhelm where people get into a situation where no matter what they do, they're going to disappoint somebody. Right. And so either they're going to disappoint their family or their employee or their friend or their partner or themselves. Right. But like, there's no good move. You're going to disappoint somebody no matter what. And that is that's a really tough place to be. And so unfortunately, right, humans are just really capable of just running faster, digging harder, and we can just do that. And some people can do that for a very long time, but a lot of people just can't. And they'll just do it anyway. And it's easier to do that in some ways than to stop and think, is there a better way? Is there a different way of doing this? And so much of the overwhelm that I see in people is a simple lack of awareness of what's causing the overwhelm. And that sounds very circular, but it's true. We just get inundated and busy. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, I'm spending 2 hours a day on email. And when you actually look at the numbers, it's more like 20 minutes, right? Or like, yeah, I'm getting 4 hours of solid work done today. And it's like, well, no, it's actually like an hour, And so we're extremely unaware of that. There was an app, it might still be around, but there was an app years ago called I Done This. And all it did was every day it would email you at 6 o'clock and say, what'd you get done today? And you would respond, and you get rewarded for like keeping a string of those and not breaking a streak. But also it would tell you at the end of the week, hey, this is all the stuff you got done. And I always found it so interesting when I was using that email would come in at 6 o'clock, and I would have to look at my calendar to remember the things that I had gotten done that day, because there had just been so many different things, so many different directions. So, and that's fine to have to like do that and have that reference. And that's part of like the optimization and the tracking that we can all do. But just with the biological meat that we have, it's really hard. So it's just easier to be like, oh my God, I just did so much today. I don't even know what the time went. It was a blur.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we all have that where we can't really keep track. So kind of moving into it a little bit, obviously you guys, I know the last thing you want to do is read a book when you're overwhelmed, but you kind of got to read the book to get some of the ideas. You just do. But what are some of like your 2 to 3 favorite kind of optimization tools? I don't want to say tricks necessarily because they're not tricks, but some optimization tools or methods to, if you're one of these people at home right now, super overwhelmed, can't get it done, what are a few things that they should start doing now?
Well, I'll give you the number one, which is the biggest one, and it's the closest thing to a silver bullet that exists in productivity. And that is asynchronous communication. So the exact opposite of what we're doing right now, which is fine. There's a time and a place for synchronous conversation, but for asynchronous conversation, most of you are using tools that do that anyway. Email is one of them, text messaging one of them, but most people don't use them that way or view them that way. A lot of people have their second screen. I'm pointing to the air because I don't have that. They have that second screen with the email up all the time, right? And so it's not an asynchronous communication tool. It is a to-do list that people are filling for you all the time. That's a problem. So I use, and the tool doesn't necessarily matter, but I use an app called Carbon Voice for 99% of my communication. So I do coaching, and I do one-on-one private coaching, and my clients have unlimited access to me. They can message me as many times as they want, whenever they want, as often as they want, for as long as they want. And I currently have about 24 clients in, I think, 17 time zones. And I spend about 20 minutes a day coaching. And it's more high impact than when I used to do the old method where I would meet with somebody for an hour every week and, see what we could get done in that time. And it's so interesting to me to see how effective that is, where somebody can leave a message for me at, Friday at 3 o'clock, right after they have a fight with their partner and they're about to go into the weekend, and just unload on me. And I can listen to their message 3 hours later on 2x speed, and then think about my response, and then respond to them, and then they can go about their weekend and move on to the next issue. And you just see so much more growth. So we already know, most people know, the majority of the meetings that we have could have been an email, right? Well, majority of those meetings could have been a voice message, right? So with all the things that I have going on, and I have my coaching, and I have 5 kids, and I'm on our local school board, and I am the vice president of our local rescue squad. I'm an EMT. I've been a volunteer EMT for 15 years. This conversation with you is the only scheduled meeting I have this entire week. All right, so everything else is done asynchronously. Wow. And that's how I get back my time. And what's really fascinating about that for me is I posted a video a few weeks ago on LinkedIn. I was on the way to a workout. I do a workout with this group of really great guys at 5:30 in the morning, 3 times a week. And it was 5:15 in the morning, and I did this video saying, hey, it's 5:15. In the last 15 minutes since I woke up, I've talked to a couple of coaching clients. I've sold a new coaching client. I'm working with me. I did this. And this was all done using Carbon Voice. And a lot of the comments were basically like bashing me for promoting the hustle culture. And it was like, no, you don't understand. I'm like, I'm not getting up early because I don't have the chance to work out later. I'm getting up early and doing this because there's a group here, and I can get all the stuff done because the majority of my day is spent with my wife and my kids. The work is the bookend to everything else that I'm doing. I'm working late and I'm working early, not because I'm working the whole day. It's still less than an hour a day. So asynchronous communication is absolutely, by and large, the number one thing. The second one I would say is around automation. So obviously we have AI now, and I could talk about that for hours, but I feel like it's so pervasive now. Most people know a lot of the great things that you can do with AI. But the big thing is just thinking through all of those tasks and things that you do that could be done by an automation or by AI. And when I'm talking about automation, I'm talking more about like Zapier or N8 or IRCTT and those things, which can tie into ChatGPT and stuff like that. But what you should be looking at is anytime you use the word every in your day or your business, right? Every time a new client signs up, every time I do a podcast recording, every time I send an invoice, the word every should be a trigger and a flag for you that this is a repetitive activity. And any repetitive activity in your life probably has an element, if not its entirety, that can be automated completely and taken off your plate. So start thinking about that in terms of automation. If this, then that. What are those triggers and actions that I can take advantage of so that I don't have to do this anymore? And the thing about automation to think about is automation is, yes, it's cheaper. Yes, it works 24/7. It never quits. It never gets sick, all this stuff. That's all great. But for me, the number one benefit of automation is a reduction of errors, right? Because if I'm not relying on a human, then I don't necessarily have to be up in the middle of the night being like, wait, did I get that thing done? Did we send the invoice? Did we send the gift to that new client? Like, no, just automate it all and you never think about it again. And that eats away at that overwhelm. And then the third one is having a proper project management system, which most people don't. The way that most people learn how to use to-do list is completely wrong, in my opinion, and like neurologically incompatible. The idea of like a vertical list that you might write down and cross off things doesn't work. The only way, in my opinion, is that people can effectively manage projects and tasks in a Kanban style board, meaning where you have like lists that represent phases. So anybody who's ever used Trello or even a whiteboard with Post-it notes on it, but basically the way Kanban works is that you have a list and you have phases, which could be like to do, doing, done, and then you have individual tasks within each of those that you can move between them as you need to. So essentially the idea is that a lot of people are doing their to-do lists on its side. We need to flip that over and then do it in a horizontal way. And that's a very, very sort of quick overview of that, but a lot of people use project management tools the wrong way.
No, I think that's super helpful. And those are 3 things. As I said, there's guys listening at home, there's a lot more to it. And, you've got to check out, you've got to check out both of Ari's books, honestly, because that kind of, we could do a whole separate, discussion on this, but there's so many founders listening and everyone just wants to get out. They want to figure out a way out, yet they can't get out because they're working in their business 24/7, sometimes more than it feels like 24/7, but they're not necessarily working efficiently and they're setting up the business to be reliant on them. But these are the types of tools, as you set them up, such as automation, that will get you guys kind of out. So with the time we have left, Ari, if you don't mind, one of the things that caught my attention, it was in your bio, it was in pretty much anything written on you, is one of the ways you kind of came out of Crohn's disease was productivity, figuring out how to keep your life running. But the other thing is you mentioned biohacking. And we've had a few different people on and talk about that. It's a fascinating topic to a lot of our listeners as well as me. What were kind of your core tenets for biohacking? What were some of the things you discovered that really allowed you to function at fuller capacity?
So there's sort of three main elements, right? So we've got nutrition, supplements, and fitness. And the productivity stuff is a really big part of that because, to me, stress was one of the. I would argue that stress was probably 60 to 70% of the issue with the Crohn's, and with a lot of inflammatory illnesses, stress is inflammatory. So, in many ways, the productivity system I created was born out of a need to systematically attack that stress. But from a nutrition standpoint, so it's always so fascinating sort of talking through this because people have a lot of preconceived notions about it. I never went gluten free. I was not a vegan, like none of that stuff. What I ultimately ended up finding was that a diet that was very high in good fats, so grass-fed butter, pasture-fed yolks, heritage-raised pork, grass-fed beef, those kinds of things, and avocados, proteins, all that, coconut oil, and low in sugar. That was it. That if I had to sum it up, like that was it. I personally think that the pescatarian diet, where you eat everything, or you eat vegetables and then you eat fish, I think that that's probably one of the healthiest diets in existence. And I did that for a very long time. That's not currently what I do now. I pretty much eat anything. But I think that was probably the best diet that I was ever on at any given point. But again, high fat, low sugar. Supplement wise, really good probiotics. I think, especially in the American diet, there really isn't enough fermented foods. And so I don't think we get enough probiotic support. So a really good probiotic. Turmeric, or curcumin, which is the active element in turmeric, as an anti-inflammatory, very, very powerful anti-inflammatory. And krill oil, not fish oil, krill oil, also was really effective. And then there was one other. So there was one unusual supplement that I think was extremely helpful for me, and that was cat's claw. So cat's claw is an Amazonian tree bark that acts as a smooth muscle relaxer, and the intestines are smooth muscle. So that was an interesting one that I found to be very, very powerful and very helpful. Fitness-wise, that was a little tricky because my original idea, sort of hypothesis, was that if I could essentially turn my body into like a furnace in terms of like metabolism and just, work out really hard, basically, that I could kind of burn through any food that I put in my stomach. Now that's completely anecdotal and not really a science-based approach, but that was the idea.
But it made sense to you at the time, which is half of trying things out,
Yeah, and so I ended up doing an Ironman, which was very unexpected. And I do not think that the triathlete body is particularly healthy, but because it's basically legs and lungs, like you're just cold all the time, and that's not what I want. But really, functional training, I think it's important to lift heavy things. That's especially for men, but for women too, for bone density and stuff. I think that was really helpful, and a relatively modest amount of cardio, honestly, was also helpful. So that's just not about being fit. It's also the endorphin release of that, the hormone regulation, everything that goes along with that. So kind of like just a very well-rounded diet and fitness regime worked. There were some specific things when I was in more flared states, but the truth is that my baseline was terrible. It was just really bad because when I was working in construction, I was eating fast food twice a day. I was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, which I haven't had a cigarette in 15 years now, and just not and drinking too. So I don't drink. That's another one.
I think people underestimate like how sugar really is poison. at the end of the day. And I get it. Look, it tastes great. There's no question. And you can make some fantastic things out of sugar. Again, no question. And alcohol also is sugar largely, right? So
Yeah.
I think people underestimate kind of how it really messes you up, especially if you have any kind of inflammatory response, and everyone does. It's just various levels. But I see so many people. I mean, I've lost a lot of weight personally, but I see so many people struggle, and it's really the sugar that gets them every time.
Yeah.
And then the sugar causes all the other bad habits to come back. It's the most interesting thing. I've never quite figured out why that is.
Yeah, that was a tough one for me. I have a major sweet tooth, so that was definitely a tricky one. And then also it's just sort of like emotional eating, right? Which is another thing. Like, I mean, everyone to some extent can have that issue, but with Crohn's too, like you're just in this like you're in a battle with yourself, right? It was very tough.
I can only imagine. Well, Ari, you definitely are inspirational. Before you go, though, I would want to ask you, what does it mean to you to level up?
So that's where Kaizen comes in. To me, if I am better today in any way than I was yesterday, right? And that I've gotten pushback on this before because, well, what is it, 1% better? Or, it doesn't matter. It's this continual idea of improvement, right? Small hinges swing big doors. So if I become a slightly better communicator today, if I am a better leader, if I'm a better husband, a better father, like any of those things to me build on each other and they're transferable skills to me as a human, right? So leveling up is exactly that, like that continual improvement in small steps.
I could not agree more. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Ari Meisel said it best, little hinges swing big doors. So what little changes should you be making to your daily routine and the way that you work to increase productivity? So A, you can free up more time to spend with the people you love and doing the things you care about. And B, start to consider a meaningful exit from your business down the road. Maybe we all should sit down and reevaluate our productivity.
Follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player.